All right, it's 12:30, so I'm gonna get started. So thank you everyone for joining the South Texas Regional Family Medicine Grand Rounds. Next slide, please. So thank you in advance for muting your microphone once the presentation begins, being attentive to the presenter and engage in the session, keeping your camera on when appropriate, registering for the CME credit, and completing and submitting a session eval form. Next slide, please. So this is the activity code. Oh, seeing there's no code in this slide. So I'll put the code in the chat, seeing that there's no code on here. So sorry about that, everyone. So I'll put that in the chat. So next slide, please. And this is just information to get it. Again, I'll put this in the chat. I apologize for that. Next slide, please. So here's information regarding the CME transcripts and how to access those. Next slide, please. And then this is just information regarding the AAFP credit system. Next slide, please. And then these are our core competencies. All right, next slide, please. So Emmanuel Ohuabunwa has no financial relationships with ineligible companies to disclose. Next slide, please. All right, Dr. Shi.
All right. I have the pleasure of Dr. Emmanuel Ohuabunwa, who is an assistant professor in emergency medicine and a health equity scholar at UT Southwestern Dallas. He serves as the treasurer and co-chair of the Educational Trust Committee for the Association of Nigerian Physicians in America, working to increase outreach and mentorship opportunities for students of Nigerian descent interested in medicine. He completed residency at Yale Emergency Medicine, during which he served on the board of various organizations, including African Research Academies for Women, the abbreviated for ARAW. In 2016, Dr. Ohuabunwa and the rest of the executive board of ARAW received the AmeriCorps Volunteer Service Award from President Barack Obama for their work in increasing female participation in research in Africa. That was a very distinguished award. In 2021, Dr. Ohuabunwa was named on the 40 under 40 list by the New England Tri-State Urban Professional Network. He was also awarded a certificate of congressional recognition by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee for community service and achieved the highest score in the entire residency on the National In-Training exam while publishing papers in esteemed journals. Dr. Ohuabunwa's area of interest is health equity and advocacy. His most recent piece in the Annals of Emergency Medicine, titled Say Our Names, We Are Doctors Too, aims to change the culture around names by tackling name-based microaggressions and the resultant differential use of formality in medicine. He plans to continue to work on such issues related to health equity at UT Southwestern. So Dr. Ohuabunwa attended Johns Hopkins University on full scholarship and graduated with an impressive 3.98 GPA in neuroscience, a feat that was made waves around the world and resulted in awards from various organizations, including the Scholar of the Year Award by the African Diaspora Organization, the top Nigerian African Youth of the Year by the Christian Association of Nigerian Americans, and the regulatory message from the President of Nigeria, His Excellency Goodluck Jonathan. Dr. Ohuabunwa went to attend Yale University, where he completed a combined MD and MBA degree on a full scholarship. In his spare time, Dr. Ohuabunwa enjoys mentoring students, reading widely, cooking, and playing basketball. He's a native Houstonian, and he's reluctantly adjusting to root for the Dallas sports teams. So without further ado, let's hear from Dr. Ohuabunwa. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Dr. Shi. I think that was in my LinkedIn. That was from a while ago. But I really appreciate that. and I am really honored to be able to speak to you guys. It is such a pleasure. Um, I am happy to be talking on a topic, diverse name, no problem, frameworks for combating name-based microaggressions in the clinical setting. You can call me Dr. O until you learn how to say my name. And let's get on with it, right? Um, so objectives would like to define microaggressions, its name-based subtype, and the impact on individuals and society, describe the importance of names and their meanings, recognize how name-based microaggressions can impact professional growth, turnover, and burnout, and review strategies for combating name-based microaggressions personally and professionally. My journey, I like the photos because it's way more fun than all that. This is me born in Nigeria, moved to the city of Beyonce when I was 13, aka Houston, Texas. Went to undergrad at Hopkins and then Yale for med school, business school, and residency, and thought I was going to be there for life. And then I met my wife, who was never going to live in Connecticut because it's way too cold. So we compromised and I moved to Texas. Also, my family is in Texas. So here we are. I'm really excited to be in Dallas and have had a lot of fun so far. So before we get started, I like to ask a question. I would love to hear some answers towards the end of this presentation. So I'm gonna give you some time to think about it. And if you don't, I'll call on people. Good times. So what does your name mean to you? And let me modify this thing so I can actually see my slides because it's just showing all the people and I can't see. Okay, what does your name mean to you? So I'd like for you to think about that. While we think about that, let me give you a few things. So this was from a paper called titled Teachers, Please Learn Our Names, Racial Microaggressions in K through 12. This was from a parent. They wrote this. When we chose our daughter's names, we wanted to give them something that they could carry with them, something that they could use as strength, as home in a world that might not always nurture them as we would want it to. We gave them Nahuatl names. We gave them names that were hundreds of years old that carried with them the prayers of their great-grandmothers, names that represented their own spirits, but that also manifested the spirits of their people. We gave them names that we knew would be a challenge at times. Lord knows I struggle with that. And that might even feel like a burden when they just want to blend in. But we needed them to know that they come from somewhere and that this is their strength, their power, and the representation of our hope for their futures. And for those of the children they will have someday. We gave them what we could, names that are truly theirs, Xochitl and Citlali, which means flower and star. So you see this beautiful thing that the parents are doing, trying to bring their desires, their prayers, their culture and rich heritage into the family with a name. Unfortunately, the opposite happens on the kid side. So this was a paper looking at children, having them write a haiku about their names. These were second graders. And one of them wrote this, ugly name, ugly name. What kind of name is Adaku? I would rather be named Mary. Ugly name, ugly name. My other friends have real names. Why can't I? I can feel the pain from this little kid who is struggling in a world where her parents, Adaku actually means daughter born into wealth. So she's struggling in a society where people do not celebrate difference. She looks at all her friends who have normal names, real names, and she looks at herself and everybody struggles with their name, which, how many syllables is it? And she feels like this is an ugly name. So my aim today is to empower people who care with tools to celebrate difference so that one day stories like that of Adaku are no longer commonplace. So let's get on with this, right? So I ask you guys, what does your name mean to you? And, you know, I believe in equal treatment. Therefore, if I ask you, I must tell you too. So I'll go first. So my name is Emmanuel Chibikem Ohuabunwa. So Emmanuel means God with us. Chibikem means God is my strength. There's a lot of God in that. My parents are pastors. I was actually born premature. And, you know, if you think the health system here is bad, think about the system in Nigeria and how really bad it was, especially like 30 something years ago. And so while in the ICU, I almost died on multiple occasions. And what kept my mom going was that God was her strength. You know, I don't, I'm not subscribing to any religion necessarily, but I'm just saying that was a big thing for her. To me, that name reminds me of that I wasn't supposed to be here, and therefore I should use whatever tools I have in order to make a difference. Ohuabunwa means a child is not a slave. It was a reminder to my great-grandfather. He took on the name as a reminder to him of the importance of caring for one's offspring and avoiding them being sold into slavery. And it's a very important name and a strong meaning of that importance of taking care of one's offspring. So my name means a lot. I wear my name with pride. I wear my name with importance. But that was not always the case. So let's talk about why. Microaggressions. We know about microaggressions. These are brief, commonplace indignities that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative slights towards target groups. Microaggressions can be related to race, sexual orientation, gender, and other target groups, including names. We've heard about some of the negative effects of microaggressions: mental health, including depression, anxiety, increased stress, PTSD; physical health, including substance use disorder, alcohol use disorder. And then the big one to talk about is bystander health. You think about you know, this was a study by Schneider et al., where they played videos and showed people experiences of harassment. And they found that the people that were watching had just as bad of the mental and physical distress as the people who were the targets of this. As one can imagine, this becomes very important in an environment, in a workplace, where it sets the pace for a hostile work environment, so that it's no longer a between me and you, but a between me, you, and a lot of other people who are seeing this happen in the environment. Therefore, it becomes important, therefore, to eradicate different forms of microaggressions and finding ways to create an inclusive environment for all. Microaggressions have been associated with burnout. There's been multiple studies, whether looking at racial and ethnic microaggressions and also sexist microaggressions, looking at surgeons and anesthesiologists. This was a JAMA surgery study looking at medical students those who experience higher rates of microaggressions were more likely to experience burnout. Microaggressions have been associated with burnout and turnover. This was a study by some of my colleagues at Yale who looked at medical students and found that those who experience at least one microaggression weekly are more likely to consider medical school transfer and also withdrawal. The problem is that from a business, aside from the bad parts, that yes, this is not good from an emotional point of view, from a business point of view, turnover is very expensive. This was a study done in JAMA Internal Medicine looking at the business case for investing in physician well-being, and they estimated about $500,000 to $1 million to replace a physician. Think about replacing a nurse practitioner, all the APPs, different levels of care. When you start thinking about the amount it is to recruit someone, to interview them, the time it takes to get them to move here, the bonus you had to pay in order to lure them to move here, the loss of productivity that occurs from somebody new coming in, you start adding all these values and it becomes a lot of money. Therefore, institutions need to focus on ways to continue to create an inclusive environment for all in order to prevent turnover and in order to prevent these, if for nothing else, to prevent these expenditures that can occur related to it. So I wrote this paper called "Say Our Names We're Doctors Too in the Annals of Emergency Medicine." And I talk about my experience there in residency, and I encourage people to read this. This is a page and a half, so it should take you like 2 minutes to go through the whole thing. I just finished, this was my 4th year of residency. I walked into the emergency department. Everybody knew me for the most part. In the ED, when someone relatively sick is coming in, everyone just goes in. So at this point, the attendant, two other junior residents, and me, the senior resident, I was standing at the front, at the head of the bed. And the attendant, walks in and says, "Hi, my name is Dr. Jones." Obviously, I'm changing the names to protect their privacy. These are Doctors Jonas and Johnson. She introduces the other 2 people, and then she talks about me and points to me and says, "This is Manny." So I gulp, like, she's known me for a minute. Why did she call me Manny? I, push it away and focus on taking care of the patient, because that's the number one thing and the most important thing. But later on, I began to think about the different times when this had happened, where it was Manny and Dr. Jones, Manny and Dr. Johnson, Manny and Dr. Jonas, whether with residents, whether with medical students were called doctors, medical students were called different things as opposed to me, whether with nurses. And so patients would complain and say they hadn't seen a doctor after I had seen them. And so when this happens, the reason things are called microaggressions, it's not because they're small, it's just because that, one time it doesn't really matter. 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, when it starts happening on multiple occasions, it becomes problematic. So I began to have anxiety when names are involved. Began to feel burnout due to lack of recognition, because it was never Dr. Ohuabunwa or Dr. This. It was always the guy with the cool shoes. Who's that? There's too many people who wear cool shoes. So I never got recognition for things I did for people, or for like when they were thinking about chief residents, or when they were thinking about awards, or whatever resident. It just never happened. And you just start feeling imposter syndrome, where you're like, I think I do good and stuff, but maybe they're saying something. Maybe I'm not meant to be here. So the question I asked myself, and the question I did was, is this a me thing, or is this something that other people experience? And secondly, if other people experience this, what can we do about it? So name-based microaggressions. This is a subset of microaggressions that captures the discriminatory actions against those whose names do not conform to mainstream standards. Name-based microaggressions have been present in society, whether in K through 12 classroom experiences, like I talked about in that Colia article in the beginning, whether looking at South Asians, Hispanics, like different groups, whenever your name does not conform to mainstream standards. In job applications, this is more racialized in the landmark study looking at if Jamal versus Katie would be called back for an interview based on their resume. Equal resumes, equal everything, but different names. And there was a very large decrease in the percentage of people who would call back Jamal. And it still occurs today. There was a repeat study by Klein et al. In 2021 that showed that this still occurred. In healthcare, whether mental health professional callbacks for a solicitation for meetings and for healthcare. So these are things that are problematic that have been occurring in society for a while. The problem then is that name-based microaggressions, aside from the problems that it occurs, can lead to differential use of formality. This is something that was popularized in multiple papers looking at speaker introductions at internal medicine grand rounds, whether internal medicine, OB-GYN, and various other groups. They found that when they reviewed those videos, that female presenters were less likely, like very high odds ratio, were less likely to be introduced by their titles compared to their male counterparts. Now, we talked about the effects of that, where there's that constant denigration of your worth in the hospital setting, where everybody is where your worth, your production, the things that you do are no longer identified or acknowledged because you happen to be female, because you happen to have a name that nobody cares to learn. Name-based microaggressions, problematic for differential use of formality. Name-based microaggressions associated with lack of recognition. Some of you might recognize this guy, Arvind Narayanan. He's a pretty popular computer scientist at Princeton. And he wrote this tweet in 2019. He said, "Today, I want to take a break from sharing research to share a personal story instead. It's a story about my name, why I once decided to quit academia, why I came back, and what I learned from it, and why I'm grateful to have an audience here on Twitter." So this guy was very important because he initially, when Netflix had started or whatnot, they had de-anonymized data. But he found that the data could be like tracked back to the person. And so he found those loopholes and he was like, hey, we need to fix that. And he was a huge impetus to the change, and so that your data, whether Netflix or whatever it was now anonymized correctly so that nobody could track you or track whatever you were doing. So it was big. Everybody was talking about it. He talked about how people were talking about his research. However, when he would meet people in conferences or whatever, they'd be like, oh, what have you been up to? And he's like, I wrote this paper, I wrote this other thing. And they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know it was you. I just saw Arvind, blah, blah, blah. If I had known it was you, I would have invited you to speak in engagements. I would have invited you to become, I could have recommended you for a faculty position. So he talked about how his name in academia, your name is kind of your brand. It's kind of your way of being known around. And therefore, when someone has a name that one does not want to identify, one does not want to learn, it becomes difficult and therefore cause someone like him who had done such great things to almost leave academia. This is problematic. Thankfully, he decided to come back and has continued to do great things while also highlighting the importance of learning ethnically distinct names. This is from a paper that we are going to be publishing soon. And it's an excerpt of someone, when we asked them what to highlight some of their experiences with ethnically distinct names. It says, I was told by a research supervisor, and pardon the typos, I was told by research supervisors I could not be listed as first author, although I had completed most of the work by myself in my research publication because my name sounded too foreign and because I was female. He used both these factors as lead-in to the publication being cited less often. This led me to still continue working in this lab and show my contributions as worthy, although the supervisor still, in the end, preferred to put the lab manager and others in front of me than have me be a first author. Although I'm not listed as first author, I know I gained a great research experience, which I can expand upon in the future. Just let that sink for 5 seconds. This is sad. Someone put in the work, did all of this stuff, supposed to be first author. This is important for their promotion, for their success. And because they have a female name and because they have a name of foreign origin, they decided to be put lower on the totem pole. This is why I give these lectures. This is important, and we can change this. The big thing I do want to highlight, though, is intent does not equal impact. I don't believe this research supervisor was doing this purposefully in order to mess or destroy the person or destroy their career or whatever. But their impact was problematic. I don't think these people who weren't citing Dr. Narayanan or inviting him to speak or inviting him for interviews were doing that on purpose. But they almost lost the great minds who was going to quit academia. So in terms of propositions for what we should do, I think it becomes important for all of us to always remember that intent does not equal impact. So I've listed things about microaggressions and how expensive and why we should care. Let's talk a few more things about why we should care. We should care because microaggressions have been associated with burnout and turnover is very expensive. We should care because you're not alone. 74% of people struggled with name pronunciation at work. Stratified by healthcare, this was in the Name of Inclusion Research report. 22% avoided talking to a coworker, 16% didn't call on someone in a meeting, 33% didn't introduce someone because I didn't know how to say their name correctly. The sad part was 9% said employers should just avoid hiring people with difficult names. That's a problem. Why should we care? We should care because how it makes people feel: annoyed, self-conscious, unimportant, disrespected, alienated, hurt, sad, angry. We should care because in the Medscape study in 2021, looking at what contributes the most to burnout, lack of respect from administrators, employers, colleagues, or staff was really high on that list. We should care because we are going to encounter ethnically distinct names. You already do at work. Percent of foreign-born healthcare workers, 29% of physicians, 22% of nursing assistants, 16% of registered nurses. This was a study in 2021 looking at immigrant workers vital to the U.S. COVID-19 response. We should care because this is really important. This was a study looking at UC Davis and in terms of rating of accurate name pronunciation, and 75% of these people noted accurate name pronunciation as moderately to extremely important. And we should care because we care about inclusion and professionalism. So we've talked about problems. We've talked about why we should care. We've talked about the importance of learning names. So what can you do? What can you do? So we're going to go through, in microaggressions literature, we talk about the source, the bystander, and the target. The source is the person who's committing the microaggression. The bystander is someone who watches, who's around, who sees it, who hears about it in one way or the other. The target is the person who the microaggressions is occurring to. I think the big thing to point out is that every one of us can be one of them. So in one instance, you can be the target, and in the next instance, you be the source. And it becomes important for us to work in a collaborative effort in order to make sure that things like this don't happen. So let's start with the source. This is where I ask for a volunteer. So Dr. Shi, can you pick someone, or can someone volunteer? I promise it's easy.
I see Caroline. Oh, actually, Colleen?
Yeah, I'm from out of state. I'll
Hannah.
volunteer. If
Okay,
it's okay.
perfect. Yes,
Who's this?
go
What's
ahead.
your name?
Colleen Fogarty. Hi.
Hey, Colleen, how's it going?
Thank you for this wonderful talk.
Thank you. Okay, cool. I promise I won't pick on you too much. All right. How do you pronounce this?
Guava.
Fantastic. How do you pronounce this?
I suspect there's variation. My first choice would be Shaquana, but it also
Exactly
wouldn't
right.
shock me if it were Shaquana. I would want to know from the person, but I think probably Shaquana would be my first guess.
Shaquana is extremely correct, is exactly correct. How do you pronounce this? It's getting harder.
Guadalajara.
Exactly. I figured this would be helpful since we're in Texas, so we know a little bit more. We're closer to Mexico and would be exposed to it. How did you learn how to pronounce all these words?
So, yeah, I wanted to say a little bit something about it because I think that the sense of people feeling worried, like I didn't want to call on the guy because I didn't know how to say his name. I mean, I've found myself in that situation, and it's like I don't want to be the bad person, like the dumbhead who's saying the wrong thing. I mean, I learned Spanish in school, and according to my husband and family members, I think I have more of an ear for cross-language things than other people. And I wonder, I think different language speakers can identify with different letters and words differently. Like my husband's grandmother grew up in Germany, and she could never pronounce the TH in Thursday. She, for her entire life in the United States, she always said Thursday. She couldn't do the. It wasn't in her. And I know some of my Spanish speaking patients cannot say my last name to save their lives. They try, they say it differently, and it's like I'm not going to go there with a patient. It's not that important to me. But I do think from my standpoint, I personally just believe like your name is the proxy for you, and it's my obligation to try my dangdest to get it as close to right as I can. That's my frame on it.
That's excellent. I like that frame a lot, trying the hardest you can. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the points you made later in the slides. But the big thing that you're saying is you've heard some of these words before, you learned them, and that's that learning theory principle, right? You're hearing, you've heard it, you probably heard it once, you forgot it, you heard it again, you forgot it. You heard it again, you forgot it, and now it becomes second nature where you don't have any problem saying Guadalajara. You have a little bit of problem saying Shaquana because you probably haven't heard it as much, but you like have heard it maybe once or twice and can guess it. And so that's that learning theory principle of space repetition. However, we don't give ourselves that opportunity when we find a name that is distinct and we avoid it. And that's the problem. Because just like you can say guava, you can say Shaquana, you can say Guadalajara, you can say Ohuabunwa. The real pronunciation of my name is Ohuabunwa, right? Most people struggle with that. So it was always Ohuabunwa growing up, and we've just used that pronunciation. But I wanted to use these things as an example to show that you know how to say all of these words. So you could say that name and not struggle with it. So my thought process when I began to have these difficulties, because it's very easy to identify a problem, it's harder to think about solutions. So the first thing I began to think about was what is the number one thing that prevents people from trying someone's name? The number one thing is a fear of mispronouncing, right? So most people who have ethnically distinct names actually want you to ask them. So how can we bring these things together? And that's where I created this ALP model, ask, learn, practice, right? When you find a name that is you have difficulty with, just ask, like, how do I say it? Learn it, ask with a desire to learn and practice it. You might not get it right the first time, the second time, the third time, the fourth time, the fifth time, but at some point you will get it right, or you get as close as possible. And it becomes important to just ask and learn. Now, people would ask you and be like, what if it's so busy that I can't? Like in that initial situation where I talked about, having a sick patient in the hospital. Well, you can always start with doctor first name, doctor first letter of last name. And then immediately after going after and saying, hey, I struggle with your name over there. How do I say it? That way we're not avoiding patient care because that's number one. We're in the hospital to take care of patients, right? Or you can also use prior experiences, just like you can say guava, Shaquana, Guadalajara, in order to like try saying the name, again, clarifying later on. So those are very, very important ways to go about it. So that's for the source ALP, ask, learn, practice. The bystanders are super important because a lot of times bystanders can be people who are of authority, especially when we think about the resident and the attendant relationship, where if something is going on, the resident might not feel comfortable talking to the attendant. But guess what? You as the colleague who is, of equal in certain ways are able to talk. So the question is, what is the language that one can use in order to be able to help out? This is where the XYZ, there's multiple models that have been out, open the front door, action, different things. They're all difficult for anyone to remember. So I like XYZ because it's easy as XYZ, right? And it's first of all, the big theme is, again, not identifying any blame to someone. I don't think you meant this, but when you do X, I feel Y because of Z. I don't think you meant to call me Manny while calling everybody else doctors. But when you do that, it undermines the relationship that I have with my patients and it makes me feel sad. What do you think about that? It gives people the opportunity to then explain themselves. It takes away that defensive nature because most people are like, if you say something like this without you taking away that stuff, they're like, oh, you're calling me racist. No, no one's calling anyone racist. Intent is not equal to impact. I'm not trying to call anyone racist at all. We are just all interested in doing the best we can to take care of patients and create an inclusive environment for all. How can we do that? So when we bring ourselves in a collaborative environment like that, it tends to yield more success than not doing the other. So source, ALP, bystander, XYZ. How about the target? So what do people do So there's the preventative strategy. So initial introduction, you know your name is ethnically distinct, can be difficult to learn. You immediately don't act surprised. You walk in and like for me at work, when I come in, hi, my name is Dr. Ohuabunwa. I write it down phonetically, just like you see on my Zoom page or whatever, so that people immediately can like at least see that for anyone who cares. You can call me Dr. O until you learn that. I give people an out.
Dr. Ohuabunwa, is it okay if I say something about the phonetic on your screen?
Yes.
About the brain. I really appreciated that. When I see a longer name, like yours was listed out on the slide,
Yes.
but I've worked on the overwhelm, but immediately I think people can feel overwhelmed because there's a lot of letters that aren't your native language. And there's this research about numbers, and that's why we have phone numbers, a 3-digit, a 3-digit, a 4-digit. So when I immediately saw the screen and then your name phonetically, I was like, oh yeah, we can do this. So I just wanted to reflect from a brain standpoint. I'm grateful how you just talked about that. Thank you.
That's such a good point, actually. Thanks for pointing that out. The way we break down numbers and make it easier to learn. I'm going to use that for my next lecture. Thank you so much. The big point I wanted to make about this slide is being flexible, right? Just like you had said earlier, your grandma, great grandma, I don't know, someone will never be able to say Thursday, right? They will say Thursday. Well, being flexible to know that some people will never be able to say it exactly with the intonation that you want, but as long as they're having a strong and a respectful attempt, I take that and I'm grateful and I'm happy that people are trying, because that, again, you have to let people be able to fail a few times. Using relatable sounds, ohwa, like guava, I give that a lot. Using email signatures is a big one, and I'm going to send a thing later on to everyone. I made a video, it's very short, it's like 1 minute, on how to make a name badge. So this is what, if you've ever gotten an email from me, you see a thing says, here's the pronunciation to my name. And when you click on it, Manny Ohuabunwa, you immediately hear it. You can listen to it 20 million times, whatever number of times you want, in order to feel comfortable about it. You can also
Can I ask you another question about this, Dr. Ohuabunwa?
Yes.
I'm so glad you have this. I saw one of my colleagues use it, and she said that she was recommended by our International Services Office. And I've been starting to think about it and wonder, in the same way we're all encouraged to put our pronouns on screen, to normalize the idea that pronouns are not just for those people over there. I wonder, what do you think about the idea of everyone starting to use a name badge on their email signature to normalize the idea that everybody might not know how to say everybody's name?
I feel like, did you read my slides beforehand?
No, I did not. I'm sorry, I did not. Sorry if I ruined something.
No, you didn't ruin anything. No, it's beautiful. And that's actually one of the name pronunciation initiatives that I will talk about towards the end. By various other institutions are doing, is having it become so that it's not just one person who does it. If everyone does it, then it becomes normalized. So it's beautiful. I love your questions, because literally you're hitting all the points. So I really appreciate it, Dr. Fogarty, right? Fogarty?
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so you can make a name badge, and that people can like do a thing. And then I don't know if you guys knew that Name Coach, they need to pay me, because I'm like giving them a lot of free media. But Name Coach, if you downloaded this extension, it's free. You can literally hear how to pronounce most things, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a name of whatever, and that can be helpful too, especially if they haven't sent you an email, or you were just confused about how to pronounce the name. They have an AI that's able to like get it as close as possible, and that gives a little bit more confidence. Again, using the ALP as much as one can. This is on Chrome, by the way. I don't know if it's on Safari yet, but And then LinkedIn, the mobile app, has a way to hear people's names, similar mechanism. You create that and people can click on it. And those are just multiple ways, because again, we are all in this together. You recognize that you have a different name, something that people are not used to. And therefore making sure that you give people the opportunity to actually learn it, because you want to activate that space repetition and that learning theory. So We've talked about the preventative strategies, things that I use, and then the mitigation strategy is mainly when to correct, because there's a lot of fear in terms of like, when can you correct? So in that situation where I had walked in with the attendant and two junior residents, and she had said, you know, these are doctor, and this is Manny, I could have easily said to the patient, hi, I'm Dr. Ohuabunwa, nice to meet you. And that would have been an easy way to like, I'm not yelling at anyone, I didn't bother anyone, but I said that. So now the person, because again, you understand that people were scared because they don't know how to pronounce it. Now you've given them the opportunity to hear it once, and hopefully that becomes better. So that's the correct and now. The correct and later using the XYZ model. I don't think you meant this, but when you did this, I felt Y because of Z could be also very, very helpful. So it gives you a language in order to be able to prevent any defensiveness and create a culture of collaboration. Now, we've talked about things the target can do, the source can do, the bystanders can do. What can the institution do? One is departmental heads leading by example. I have one of my medical directors. He does not call me Emmanuel ever. Even when we're hanging out, we're with a group of people where everyone's calling each other by first name. It's just Ohuabunwa, nice to meet. How are you? It's a thing. When you do that, it normalizes the name so that people are seeing that, hey, this person at the head is doing that. Let's make sure that we're also doing that for the people. And it also just normalizes that we are accepting of difference, so that it doesn't look like this where you feel like you're by yourself and others compared to all the others. Other things I've been trying to push for, and you know, is one is having something like this in your department or in the hospital website. So like people can hear names just like they can hear pronouns and things like that. Having it on Epic. I've been back and forth with Epic on this. Having it for patients and for providers alike, because it takes away, you know, you hear all these stories. You see, there was this viral tweet about how, you know, a resident walks into a patient's room and for the first time says their name. People just avoid them, but because the resident was in their culture or whatever, it was able to say the name. And you can see how the patient was in the ED for like chest pain. And you see how the patient was like, the face lit up. They were just so happy. They were like, no one's ever tried. And the things you do, like just a little tiny thing just made a huge difference in that provider-patient relationship. So you don't realize how high of a magnitude this can have on people. The other one is normalization of ethnically distinct names, whether in simulation, whether in various things. Instead of using John, how about use Abdul? How about use various other names that are different? How about use Angeli? You know, these are things that make it so that we are not just learning, because we are learning to take care of a multicultural population wherever we are. And therefore, we should be used to, and we should normalize saying these names. And then one of the things Dr. Fogarty had brought up is the name pronunciation initiative. Penn State has one. I was involved in the development of that. Tubman College has one too, for Michigan, University of Michigan, where they are pushing towards people. And again, you know, just want to be very clear, this is not forcing anybody. If someone doesn't want to do it, they don't have to, because we're in a free country, hashtag, right? But the goal is like for people who do want to, it's important to like have, create a name coach, create a name badge, write phonetic pronunciations of your names. This helps so that everybody feels like they are part of the team. At the end of the day, the goal is we want to be inclusive and we want to be professional. Some of the things that have been talked about in various papers, and have experienced all of these personally, unfortunately, that people do, is when you say your name, people laugh. That's very difficult. And it's kind of hard to respond, like, especially with patients and whatnot, because you're like, what am I supposed to say? Or we just started on the wrong foot, or, you know, or making a mockery of it. You know, you have people giving unwanted nicknames. My brother was in the military, and they, you know, there's some people who decided they didn't want to learn his name, so they just started calling him Okinawa. So for a long time, he was called Okinawa forever. You know, like he's out here doing one thing, trying to serve the country and whatnot, and you know, it can be demoralizing. blaming people for their names, you know, like, why do you have such a difficult name? I'm sorry, I don't know. I didn't I didn't choose my name. You want to go ask my parents, you know, like things like that. That can mess that relationship that one has with their colleagues. Asking people to teach you the name and then immediately saying there's no way I can learn that. This was something I wrote about a little while ago, about an experience where, you know, someone had asked me while at work, actually, how do you pronounce your name? And I was like, Ohuabunwa. They said, I would never be able to pronounce that. And then 5 seconds later, they walked to the front and said, O'Shaughnessy, Villanueva. Obviously, I changed the name so to protect privacy, but they said, O'Shaughnessy, Villanueva, come to the front. And in my thought process, I was like, Villanueva, O'Shaughnessy. So what are you trying to tell me? That you can say these multisyllabic names, but you don't care to learn how to say mine, you know? So it becomes difficult and has, you know, especially when intersectionality comes in. Many people know what that means, where you're, you know, both a person of color and then you're you know, a woman or you're LGBTQ or whatever it is. You start asking, why have they singled me out? Why have they said that they can't do this? Is it because of this? Is it because of this? And this leads to the mental health problems that some people might experience, especially when related to names. So, quick review. Source, ALP, ask, learn, practice. Bystander, XYZ. I don't think you meant this, but when you do X, I feel Y because of Z. Targets, preventative strategies, including maintaining flexibility, because there will be people who won't be able to say your name exactly how it's supposed to be said, but as long as they're given a try. And then mitigation strategies in order to make sure that we're all on the same page. So I'd like to end with a scenario. I would like to pick on someone else to read. Can someone please help me with this?
I can do it.
Anyone there? Oh, perfect.
I'll go. All right. So scenario, you're the principal investigator, PI of Lab X, and you meet your new assistant prior to the monthly staff meeting. Her name is Mridula.
Exactly, you said it right. Wow.
During the meeting, the PI says, just want to introduce y'all to our new assistant, period. While laughing, he says, I'll call her Jane because I will never be able to say her name correctly. Mridula appears uncomfortable with the PI's introduction. What's wrong here? What can you do? You, as in, I'm a third person in this conversation, right?
Yeah.
So what's wrong here is that he, like you said, you know, it does undermine her importance, and you know, it shows that he doesn't care about learning how to pronounce her name. And he's the PI, right? So it's the risk of this attitude being repetitive and being replicated by the other members that are there. So what can you do? I can, well, at some point say, hi, you know, my name is Caroline. What's your name? What was your name? I don't think he didn't even pronounce it at all, right? Yeah, so I guess try to, you know, make it personal and try to introduce yourself. What was your name or something like that? I think that would be my go-to. Maybe not right there and then, but as soon as possible.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing, Caroline. Anybody else have any thoughts?
I think that I would immediately, although it might be uncomfortable, I'd probably speak up and be like, hold on, like, you know, can you tell us your name and show us how to pronounce it? Because if we wait any longer, then people are just going to remember her as Jane, and that's just disrespectful. So I would definitely probably speak up, but that may be because of my last name being different growing up and me having very similar personal experiences as to what you talked about during the presentation.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Anybody else? Also, what is your last name, Valentina?
I just realized that it's not on there.
It's not.
It's
Oh,
Godoy Forero.
Galoy Ferrero? I didn't hear it.
No. Godoy Forero. It's Godoy, and then
Godoy.
Forero. I don't even know what's similar to that, but yeah.
Godoy Ferrero. Okay. Thank you, and nice to meet you, Dr. Godoy Ferrero. Anybody else have any comment?
If I can add on too, I think both of those strategies are very appropriate, and maybe a third one to either combine or button up might be going back to the PI later and doing the XYZ, you know, hey, Abdul, I'm really grateful that you got a new assistant in the lab. It was great for all of us to meet her. I felt really uncomfortable when you said Jane, since that's really far from her name. I think, you know, people's name defines people. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to work with her so you could learn her name and maybe at a follow-up meeting with the rest of us, help us learn or something like that.
I love it. That is perfect. Yeah, because it's first talking to the people, the person talking to the PI, and making sure that's corrected, because because that's gonna happen again if that's not corrected, and people will start calling her Jane forever. I love how you brought that up, Valentina, because let's go through one of the experiences someone had. When I was in the 7th grade, I missed my first day of class. One of my teachers was calling roll and couldn't pronounce my name, Nitin. As a joke, he crossed my name out of the grade book and told the class he was renaming me Frank after himself. Everyone thought it was pretty funny. And the next day at school, everyone kept calling me Frank. I soon grew used to the name, and within a few months, I was introducing myself as Frank. I went to that school for 6 years, 7th through 12th grade. By the time I graduated, I firmly thought of myself as Frank, so much so that at college, I introduced myself as Frank to everyone, including other South Asians. So this is people talking about their experience K through 12. It's problematic because of the renaming that, you know, the history of this country and occurring with people, and how Nitin in Hindu means going in the right path. So he lost his name and now decided, well, this is the dominant culture and I'm just going to do whatever they say, and losing that heritage. So he turns into that kid like Adaku in the beginning, who thinks his name is ugly and wants a real name, compared to his parents who had these prayers and desires for him. My desire is to make sure that this is no longer commonplace. My desire is to spread this word so that we have a way to be able to make things a better place where people are more comfortable and included regardless of their names. So the take-home points are: names are important and have meaning. Name-based microaggressions can be detrimental. Use ALP, XYZ, name badges, be flexible. And also individuals and institutions should set an example. This is a video I made to show people how to make a name badge. I'll send that later. I'll send it through Dr. Shio, whoever, and I think hopefully she can send it to people if y'all just want to learn how to make a name badge. And I am open for questions. Thank you so much for your participation and for giving me the opportunity to speak. Also, I'm open for people to tell me what their names mean, because I told you what my name means. So it'll be great to hear that too. So questions, comments, and answering the question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ohuabunwa.
Okay, I'll share then. So I have 3 last names. It's a cultural thing. First last name is Mom's, then my second last name is Dad's, and this is my husband's last name. I'm Brazilian, and that's how we do it there for most people. Of course, it doesn't fit in any of the fields for the forms or the card or It's just a lot of letters. So I just, and this is even at home. So just go for the last name. And then for pronunciation, so it's Polish. It means Fisher. Part of that group that immigrated from Poland came to the US, became Fisher. The other part that went to Brazil, it remained as Rybicki, and then they changed it to Rybicki. Yeah, and then for patients, sometimes maybe they just look at the different combinations of letters and they feel it's hard. So I usually say, well, it's like Rebecca, but Rybicki. And they're like, oh, okay, I get it. And then it's fine. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing, Dr. Rybicki. So it's Fisher, Rybicki, and what's the other one? There's three, right?
So Vila,
Yeah. Okay.
that's just the, just a village. And Martignoni, it's for, so we did some research. It's just the children of the Martin, like the great big Martin, somewhere in Switzerland, Italy, and that place. So, I mean, not as powerful and, really beautiful like the ones you mentioned, but yeah, it's just mostly the Fishers, there's common names that are professions and just traits and what people would do, or sometimes, the region where they were and things like that. So Fisher, I think they were fishermen and the husband loves to fish. So probably very accurate. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Caroline, Dr. Rybicki. Anybody else?
So I have a similar background. I'm from Colombia, and the reason why I have two last names is because in Colombia, similar to Brazil, we take our father's and our mother's last name, different from here in the US where you just carry on your father's last name. And my last names are important to me because I am the first doctor in my family. And I specifically chose to not change my last name after getting married because I wanted to carry on my father and my mother's last name as a doctor, just because I think it's important. And I also think that it's important so that when patients see my name, they know that I am Hispanic, and they can, feel that we have something in common. Just because, as we all know, there aren't many minority doctors. So I thought that was important. That's why my last names are important. And I've added it to my name on Zoom now.
I love it. Dr. Godoy Ferrero. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else?
I can share real quick. I'm born and raised in China. So my parents actually picked a very difficult Chinese character for my first name. Even growing up in China, people have a hard time pronouncing it. So over the years, we actually made a simplified, had this change that character to a simplified name that has the same pronunciation. So it's like, when it's difficult, it's not only in here in the US where people have a hard time saying it correctly. So that goes elsewhere too. I wish I had kept it in a way so it'll be more unique. But now my first name just means cloud. It's very easy. It's like 4 strokes. That was very easy. Everyone knows about how to say it.
No, that's beautiful. I actually wrote a piece with one of my residents. His name, he chose to keep his middle name. So when he came to, his name is Sangyup. He's Korean. He chose to keep that name, even though he had an anglicized name, Peter, but he chose to keep that Sangyup too. And so he talked about the importance of reclaiming your name, as opposed to succumbing to this pressure of hiding that identity, his Korean heritage and identity. So it's kind of interesting how it seems like there's a push towards having adopting an English name, just like in that initial thing the guy wrote Nitin, and how he changed his name to Frank and talked to even when introducing himself with his South Asian colleagues. So I think it's important to continue to hold on to that heritage and for people to respect that. Anybody else?
Oh, if I could just share a quick example, kind of maybe presented. I don't know if y'all have heard the last name Salcedo, but I'll never forget when I got a call as an intern, someone asking about uh, someone named Sauce Stew, Sauce
Mhm.
Stew, and I was like, I didn't know who they were talking about.
Mhm.
I was like, you mean Salcedo? She was like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that, or I can't pronounce that. I shouldn't even try. I really thought the person's last name was Sauce Stew. So yeah, it definitely happens. It's real.
Yeah, yeah. We will be able to change that, hopefully. Thank you for sharing.
So in the chat, Rena shared that she wants to talk about it. And I'm assuming it's Rena, she, but I don't know. My name is Rena. It's Arabic name, which means to look beyond.
Mm.
In English, it means behold, and in Spanish, it means frog.
Oh no.
Rana. Sí.
Thanks
Yeah.
for sharing, Reina. Well, yeah, and if people have any questions or comments, um, I'm open and happy to chat.
I had it's kind of an offshoot of this issue. I'm Dr. Amadi, but it's my husband. So my husband's actually adopted, and his name is very, like you would say, white sounding. It's Justin Volkman, because his adoptive father has German background. So he actually, when he was younger, would get comments from teachers. He even recalls one time in class where he raised his hand when they did roll call for Justin Volkman. And the teacher said, put your hand down, like, don't be joking, because he looks very, very Hispanic.
Yeah.
And so he's dealt with that. And now it kind of behooves him, being in healthcare administration, to have a white sounding name. But he does often get questioned about his name and his heritage, and it's now come up with our child and deciding her name, because she doesn't have that white heritage. So the debate was, does she carry his name, my name? How do we do it? Yeah. But
Wow,
just interesting names.
Yeah, that is one tough one. Why doesn't she get both names?
Yeah, she did get both names, and now and we chose to put my name first, and we said it's because mine starts with an E, so it's first in the alphabet. Yeah, so now she has both, but she'll still be questioned of like in the future, right? What are those both names? Like, where does Volkman come from? And she'll have to or not explain whether her father was adopted, and yeah.
Well, I'd like to believe, yes, that happens, and I like to believe that with enough advocacy that will change. And also there's a lot of more mixed kids, more tolerance, more, one of my best friends was having the same difficulty. He's a Hispanic man. He got married to a Chinese woman. Their son looks Chinese. His son's name is Miguel. And he was having that, but he was like, the people are going to be so confused when they look Miguel and then they look at you like,
Yeah.
but he decided he was going to name him Miguel because that's an important part of his culture, and they should be confused. That's fine, and they're gonna learn and they're gonna be educated that, hey, we don't all look a certain type of way, but our names need to be respected, and our culture and our heritages need to be respected.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for sharing, Dr. Imadi.
Of course, of course.
Is your name is it Hispanic? Is it
Iranian? So that's my name's Iranian.
Oh,
So I've kept my name because I'm half Iranian, half Hispanic, and everybody assumes I'm Hispanic, but I
okay.
like to show that I'm also Iranian.
Fantastic. That's awesome. Thanks so much for
Of course. Thank you for asking.
anybody else? Well, if there are no more questions, thank you all so much for sharing. This was fantastic. I felt really good just hearing about your names. And just spread the word. I will send, these are my references. I'm sure they're going to share the slides. And I will send the video out for making a name badge. and just be good advocates. I ask and I hope for learning people's names and just understanding the heritage that associated with that. Thank you again, and thank you, Dr. Shi, for the invitation. Truly appreciate it. And Dr. Obeide, I know she had to leave. Stacy,
Dr. Obaid.
Obeid?
Obaid.
Obeid. Okay,
Yes,
Dr.
Stacy.
Obeid. Yeah, it's a Nigerian name, so some
Yeah,
people
so
Obeide. So yeah, Obeid.
okay.
Okay, so I went
That's
to.
how she had told us to say it.
Oh,
So
I love
might
it.
have to
So
ask her again.
no, exactly. And this is actually in a study where they looked at the person's pronunciation compared to other people's pronunciation, because we have this problem, oh, not problem, this issue that occurs with people named Chang or Cow. So and some people, we have two people in our department named Cow, and one says Cow, the other one says Chow. And so people get confused because it's spelled the same way, but one is pronouncing it one way versus the other. And the importance is saying it the way the person actually wants it to be said. So Dr. Obaid, good to her for the opportunity to speak. And thank you all.
Thank you again. Thank you. Bye-bye.